Hi. So, I've been back on Twitter recently. Bad decision. After being off the platform for, over a year now. And as usual, biphobia is rampant amongst the Twitter gays. So there is this super biphobic podcast, right, called the Lavender Menace podcast. You can't make it up. And they are always talking trash about bi women, not just in the podcast, but always on Twitter. Recently, and I say recently, I mean like over a month ago, I've been in hospital a lot recently. Time isn't real anymore. Anyway, on Twitter they reignited some old discourse, which basically came down to biphobia isn't real, only homophobia is real, and they know that because even though they're lesbians, they once identified as bi. Based on their retweets and likes, they are not the only people that think this. And I'm here to tell everyone, as always, that that's fucking bullshit. Not only is biphobia real, but they just proved it by being biphobic, whilst trying to prove biphobia doesn't exist. The irony never ends. Back to the point I've said on this channel, and I will say until I can't speak any longer. Biphobia is in fact a real thing, a really dangerous thing that you should care about. People that say that it isn't are simply just contributing to biphobia, contributing to the systematic slaughter and abuse of bisexual people for, well, usually internet clout. So this video will be me laying it out real simple. Let me state what biphobia is, and let's discuss the effect it has on the lives of real, breathing bisexual people. Because biphobia is not only real, it's everywhere, and to argue it doesn't exist, it's evil and evasive. My name is Mage, this is Black and White Thinking, and I am so tired. Please consider subscribing to my channel if you enjoy this video. Please let me know what you think about it in the comments, and do not do a shot every time I say biphobia, because you will die. And I don't want that for you.
I went on a first date with a woman, and this date was going really well, had a couple of beers, we'd been there for like hours, and then halfway through we started talking about previous relationships and that kind of thing. And when I mentioned that one of my previous relationships was with a man and she realised I was bisexual, she basically stood up, said, "Thanks for wasting my time," and walked out.
Wow. So yes, Facebook fact check. Biphobia is in fact its own unique type of oppression, different but not disconnected from homophobia. For bisexual people, we suffer twice. We suffer homophobia and we suffer biphobia. That is actually what the bi stands for. But let me prove it with all the patience I can muster. What does biphobia look like? Does it actually make a difference in the day-to-day lives of bisexuals, or are we all covert straighties who want to be oppressed for attention? Well, amongst LGBT and queer scholars, the concept of bisexual erasure, bisexual invisibility, and biphobia have all been discussed pretty significantly over the last 20 years. One specific paper that, if you know anything about bisexual theory, you will probably know already, that I'm going to reference today, is that of Kenji Yoshino, who wrote for the Stanford Law Review the Epistemic Contract of Bisexual Erasure. And I'm going to use Yoshino's words and some examples from media to explain what bi-invisibility is, how it relates to biphobia, and why it's so dangerous. I may be tired, but it's not my intent to lecture. I understand that a lot of people don't understand the effects of erasure on minority groups of any kind, the kind of silent violence that eradicates entire groups of people and their history. Kenji Yoshino, in the year 2000, wrote an excessively long paper discussing how bisexuality is erased, especially in regards to the law, or at least how people discuss the law, create laws, down to how sexuality and people are spoken about in law classes. Again, it's really long and full of legal jargon. I've read it twice and yeah, it's a lot. But Kenji Yoshino is a cool guy. He's gay himself. He's currently a professor at NYU, but he was a professor at Yale for a while. He sat down with Ruth once. That's pretty cool. And in his paper, The Epistemic Contract of Bisexual Erasure, he posits the notion that straight people and gay people often come together within society to erase bisexuals. He obviously acknowledges that gay people do not have privilege over straight people or not equal in privilege to straight people, but neither are they equal in social privilege or social gains with bisexual people. and that monosexuals will often group up to render bisexuals invisible, and he goes on to prove it over this very long document. He makes clear and precise arguments for what bisexual erasure is, how it's biphobic, and he also goes on to talk about why this happens, about how monosexuals come together to maintain a status quo. A status quo that does not consider bi people real. If it does, it doesn't want to see them. Straight and gay people erase bisexuality for social gain, essentially. To quote Yoshino, bisexuals are being erased because the two most powerful sexual orientation constituencies, self-identified straights and self-identified gays, have mutual investment in the erasure of bisexuals. I call this the epistemic contract of bisexual erasure. I then support the existence of such mutual interests by demonstrating how both straight and gays use the same strategies to erase bisexuals. And then Dr. Kenji Yoshino goes on to do this. I will link his paper below and you can read it if you like. I'm going to explain it with clips from Grey's Anatomy because that's how we work at Black and White Thinking. Yoshino breaks down bi-erasure into different categories. There are different ways in which you can erase bisexual people, different ways in which you can oppress them. The first type of bisexual erasure Dr. Yoshino talks about is what he calls class erasure. Explicit class erasure, as he describes it, is essentially the denial of bisexuality, the idea that bisexuality just doesn't exist.
You can't be serious.
When we kissed, it felt good.
It felt good because you were drunk.
What's the harm in going out on one crummy little date?
You're gay, Blaine.
I thought I was, but I've never even had a boyfriend before. Isn't this the time you're supposed to figure stuff
I can't
out?
believe that I'm hearing this right
Maybe
now.
I'm bi. I don't know.
Bisexual is a term that gay guys in high school use when they want to hold hands with girls and feel like a normal person for a change.
Should I tell people about Tom?
I can't answer that for you.
I don't know, I'm doing a lot of press this week and everyone wants to know the name of my new girlfriend.
Oh, that's complicated.
Yeah. Well, it's you people. You're the problem.
Me people.
Yeah, lesbians, capital L's over here. You just don't believe bisexuals are real.
Oh.
Bi now, gay later.
All right, that's funny, but that was 20 years ago.
I know, but look, I bring a man into this world, it changes everything. You know it.
The second type of class erasure he talks about is implicit class erasure, which as Yoshino sees it, is essentially the unnaming of bisexuality.
Are you a lesbian? Not strictly.
The leaving bisexuality out, the not even considering it an option. It's not the outright denial that it exists, it's the hiding of it so that no one can question whether or not it does exist. Pride being called gay pride, bi people being called gay when they're not, they're bi. An example of this that will personally always set me on fire is that of Jamie Rodemeyer.
Suicide of a gay teenager from Buffalo that we first told you about yesterday is getting some very high-profile attention this morning. ABC's Bianca Golodrigo reports on the growing movement nationwide to make sure that Jamie Rodemeyer is not forgotten.
Jamie Rodemeyer, a young boy who killed himself about a decade ago now. He was a huge Lady Gaga fan and he was bisexual.
Hi, this is Jamie from Buffalo, New York, and I'm just here to tell you that it does get better. Here's a little bit of my story. December 2010, I thought I was bi, and then I always got made fun of because I virtually have no guy friends, and I only have friends that are girls, and it bothered me because people would be like, faggot, fag, and they'd taunt me in the hallways. And I just want to tell you that it does get better, because when I came out for being bi, I got so much support from my friends, and it made me feel so secure. Hi, I'm Jamie, and I just wanted to make a video telling you that it gets better, and as for me, it's going shitty as hell, but it gets better, and don't let anybody bring it down. So, Be proud of who you are and love yourself. You were born this way.
When he died, it was reported everywhere that he was a gay kid that had killed himself, which is technically true, but he was bi. He was a fan of Lady Gaga, who was bi. This story was always framed as young gay boy ends his life, Lady Gaga, straight ally, supports him, when, again, they are both just bisexual, and even in death they won't name us. Bisexuality being called anything but bisexuality will always be a personal piss-off point for me. There's no need for it, and it is by erasure, as Yoshino kindly points out.
I don't know if any of you know this, but we lost a little monster this week. And I wanted to dedicate this song to him tonight because he was really young. If you would just look up on the screen for a moment.
Yoshino also talks about how these things exist on a micro level, in what he calls individual erasure. Bisexuality exists, but the people in your life will not acknowledge that you are bisexual. Not in my backyard syndrome, essentially. Bisexuality is fine, I guess, as long as it doesn't exist anywhere near me.
Your mother and I talked about what you told us last night.
We don't need to talk about that right now. We want you to know we're not upset.
Great. I'm not upset either.
Because no matter what you call yourself, you still like men. So you can still get married and have a child.
I can do those things with either a man or a woman.
Yes, but it will be a man, because this is just a phase.
This can also include things like, it's a phase, you'll grow out of it, bi now, gay later. Things like straight-washing people or characters, historical figures, or gay-washing them, at some level ignoring their bisexuality or seeing it as insignificant.
I don't know what happened between Denny Duquette and Izzy Stevens that night, but unless you were in the middle of that situation, I don't see how you can make a judgment.
Easy. There's right and there's wrong. And this was wrong. And illegal. There is no gray area here. You can't kind of think this is okay. You can't kind of side with Izzy Stevens. And you can't kind of be a lesbian.
Yes, I can.
It's trying to guilt people out of bisexuality, picking apart its definitions, its meanings, its behaviours, making people ashamed of what they are, making people not want to identify as bisexual. Yoshino says that individual erasure helps class erasure, which is essentially the end goal, the complete annihilation of bisexuality. These are tests for bisexual people, and they are made for us to fail.
I mean, you're supposed to love me, no matter what. That's what a parent does.
I love you with all my heart. But with all that's going on with you now, look, I'm scared for you. It's an abomination. It's an eternity in hell.
Let's not start with words like hell.
Oh, that's why you flew 3,000 miles? To tell me I was going to hell?
The last category of bi-erasure that Yoshino describes that has importance to us is delegitimation, which is essentially bisexuality is wrong, and here's why. Obviously, any of these things that I've mentioned can probably fit into any of these categories. Delegitimation is saying things like bisexuals are greedy, they are cheaters, they spread HIV, they're slutty, they're straight people in cosplay. Things like that. The hateful stuff. The violent crimes. The abuse done to us because of our bisexuality. Which leads us into our next point pretty well. I'll let the ladies of Sex and the City finish this one out.
He's a bisexual. Well, I could have told you that, sweetie. He took you ice skating, for God's sake. The weird thing is he was so open about it. You know, hi, I'm a bisexual, like, hi, I'm from Colorado or something.
I don't think you're allowed to be bisexual in Colorado.
Is that a problem? I mean, what kind of question is that? Is that a problem?
Of course it's a problem.
What did you say? I said it wasn't a problem. I panicked. He's such a good kisser.
You know, that generation is all about sexual experimentation. All the kids are going bi.
So what, if all the bi kids are jumping off a bridge, you gonna do that too?
I'm a trisexual. I'll try anything once.
When did this happen? When did the sexes get all confused?
Somewhere between Gen X and Gen Y, they blended and made XY.
You know, I did the date the bisexual guy thing in college, but in the end, they all ended up with men.
So did the bisexual women.
Which explains why there are no available men left for us.
Oh, jeez. Maybe I do have a problem with this. I'm an old fart.
Correction, a hot old fart.
I'm not even sure bisexuality exists. I think it's just a layover on the way to Gay Town.
Isn't that right next to Ricky Martinville? You know, I think it's great. He's open to all sexual experiences. He's evolved. It's hot.
It's not hot, it's greedy. He's double dipped.
That's a little bit of what biphobia is, what it can look like. Again, if you want to read Yoshino's 150-page law review, feel free. I hope someone finds what I've just done helpful. But to the more important part of the video, but the definitely less fun. What are the consequences of biphobia? And how does biphobia affect bisexual people on a day-to-day basis? Well, trigger warning, I'm going to bullet point a bunch of areas where bisexual people suffer because they're bisexual. Parts of our lives that are affected because of biphobia. And it's some really ugly, gnarly stuff, and I just hope you can all heed my begging as I lay this all out. These great statistical eldritch horrors.
And on Judgment Day, British justice delivered in Amber Heard's favour. This morning, Johnny Depp lost his libel trial against The Sun after they branded him a wife-beater. Judge Mr Justice Nichol found that 12 of the 14 alleged incidents of domestic violence were, in his words, substantially true.
Start as you mean to go on. Abuse of all kinds is something bisexual people are almost always at a higher risk of, especially in regards to interpersonal violence and sexual assault.
When I was a teenager, I met a man. I looked up to him in many ways and felt like we had a special bond, and I had no intention of it turning into something romantic. When it eventually did, I wasn't sure how to stop it, as he had a certain charisma and power, and I quickly surrendered to his charms. In the beginning, he treated me like a princess. I was smart, but a smart 18-year-old is still an 18-year-old, and I thought I had fell in love. It wasn't until much later that I realized everything he had told me was a lie and part of what is called the grooming process.
According to a national survey done in the US a few years ago, linked below as always, that looked into intimate partner violence and sexual violence, half of all American bisexual women report to have been raped in their lifetime. This is a higher average than straight women or lesbian women have in regards to rape. It was found that 75% of bi women in the US had suffered sexual violence, compared to 46% of lesbians and 43% of heterosexual women. Numbers too high all round, in my opinion. The bisexual number is high though, and bisexual women are seen as prey, as a buffet for sexual predators, it seems, which we're not going to sit here and pretend doesn't have a huge connection to the over-sexualization and objectification of bisexual women within both media and society. The CDC in America states that almost half of bisexual women will be raped between the ages of 11 and 17. So this isn't even just happening to bisexual adults, this is something happening to bisexual children. This is not just an issue of abuse, this is an issue of child abuse. Dr. Nicole Johnson of the Department of Education at Lehigh University did an entire study, an entire paper, intending to specifically find out why bisexual women do suffer such high levels of sexual violence. And she named 3 things that she thought influenced this: substance abuse, hypersexualization, and biphobic harassment. All of these things, of course, relate to each other, and specifically the experience of bisexual women. I have talked about that a lot on this channel. Those that are hypersexualized, objectified, and harassed are more likely to use substances. Those people that use substances are more likely to be abused and harassed and objectified. People who use substances are more likely to be sexually abused. Dr. Johnson also comments on an age-old bisexual dichotomy that has been commented on many times before by many scholars, academics, and total random people like me. that the confusing confliction between bisexual visibility, the fact that we are sexualized and everywhere in terms of commodification, that we are a product sold in a capitalist society, versus the invisible bisexual existence where we are erased from conversations, we are erased from queerness, we have no culture, etc., can be a really hard thing for bisexuals to live with, and it messes with our brains, especially that of bisexual women who are often left feeling without a pack.
On the day of their divorce settlement, Depp texted a Hollywood agent saying she's begging for total global humiliation. She's gonna get it. I have no mercy, no fear, and not an ounce of emotion, or what I once thought was love for this gold-digging, low-level dime-a-dozen. I'm so happy she wants to go to fight this out. I can only hope that karma kicks in and takes the gift of breath from her.
In regards to IPV, domestic violence, bisexual women also suffer higher rates than heterosexual women and lesbian women in almost every study I've ever read in regards to this topic. According to research conducted by Bethany Coston for an article she wrote for the Interpersonal Violence Journal, it's a legit medical journal, I've referenced it a few times before in other videos. In her study, she found that up to 78% of non-monosexual women, bisexual women, reported that they had suffered IPV, reported having been abused by a partner. Almost all of those women reported being abused by a male partner specifically. Bimisogyny is a thing, and it's dangerous. It gets women killed. You do not advocate for abuse victims. You cannot be an anti-abuse activist if you do not acknowledge that the majority of the people you fight for are bisexual women.
What we can see in yellow are the most extreme experiences of poverty in the community, and those are people who are bisexual women and transgender individuals. So transgender women, transgender men, non-binary, gender non-conforming people are experiencing poverty at 29.4%. And if you look to the left, you'll see cis gay men. So those are not transgender, cisgender gay men and cisgender straight men experience poverty between 12 and 13.4%.
Bisexual people are also more likely to be poor than their heterosexual and gay and lesbian peers. The Williams Institute at the UCLA School of Law found that 30% of bisexual Americans were living in poverty, 30% of trans people too, and up to 50% trans people identify as non-monosexual. So specifically, they reported earning under the national poverty threshold. Gay men and lesbians reported similar levels of poverty to their heterosexual counterparts, around 16%, compared to trans people and bi people's 30%. That's almost double. It's definitely double when you consider that Rice University in Texas found in their study much higher numbers, with 40% of bisexual men reporting living in poverty and 42% of bisexual women. High rates of poverty in bisexual people's lives is connected to biphobia. It's a direct consequence of it, and people can fight me on that. In a paper published by the University of Essex here in the UK, which, side note, takes a moment to point out that there is very little literature on bisexuals in the UK, which is true, there is fuck all. This paper essentially discusses LGBT people in the UK and poverty levels in relation to heterosexual people. And this study also found that heterosexual women and lesbians tended to report similar poverty rates. It found that lesbians were actually less likely to be behind on payments and less likely to be in debt than heterosexual women. They were more likely than heterosexual women to obtain a university degree. Whereas in comparison to their heterosexual peers, bisexual women were found to report higher levels of poverty and higher levels of being behind on payments for things like council tax. The paper also said, and I quote, "Bisexual women are about as likely as heterosexual women to live in households with children, even young children. They are, however, strikingly less likely to have access to the internet," which is a weird thing to comment on, but a practical example of how poverty can affect us. also found that bisexual young people seem to have lower educational aspirations than heterosexual and gay or lesbian youth. The paper also says that its research found that bisexual men and women both suffer a pay penalty in the workplace in comparison to heterosexual men and women. It also said bisexual women are more likely to be single mothers, and if you know anything about being a single mother, that's the most expensive thing in the world. Flipping back to America, money comes up again when you try to look at national funding for LGBT charities. Bisexual causes, according to the last report that was done, are given less than 1% to all national money dedicated for LGBT causes. Less than 1%, even though bisexual people make up more than 50% of the LGBT community.
Erasure Edwards, who was a Jamaican bisexual man, and a few years ago it came out of how badly he was being treated by the UK Home Office, who didn't believe that he was bisexual, and they didn't really believe that bisexuality existed anyway, even though I think the Home Office has got an LGBT network group. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he was like asked about really sexually intrusive things. I don't think it was him, I think there was someone else in a similar position who was asked to, who had to provide sex tapes to prove that they were bisexual, and it's like, it's just absolutely disgusting behaviour. The thing that I've heard often comes up as regards to bisexuality is where the Home Office will ask a lesbian or gay person, what gay clubs do you go to? Oh, I go to the O Bar, I go to Heaven, I go to GAY, whatever, I'm out of touch. But because there are no bisexual clubs or pubs, what are you going to say? You know, I've been out as bisexual for half of my life. If someone said, well, what bisexual clubs do you go to? I'd be like, well, there aren't any, I don't know. You know, I might be able to mention Bicon, but there are plenty of bisexual people in this country who've never heard of it, really. So it's like asking an impossible question to answer.
Bisexual asylum seekers and refugees are also very real, no matter how little coverage they get within the media. And being a bisexual asylum seeker is less affected by the fact that one is bisexual and more by biphobia. In the essay on the government of bisexual bodies, asylum case law and the biopolitics of bisexual erasure, that can be found in the book Queer Migration and Asylum in Europe, Christian Cleese directly relates the biphobic experiences suffered by bisexual asylum seekers to Dr. Kenji Yoshino's The Epistemic Contract of Bisexual Erasure. Again, Yoshino's original essay was written for the Stanford Law Review and is written to address the consequences of bisexual erasure within the law and the justice system and everything that relates to it. Cleese adds to Yoshino's original ideas, discussing them in detail, and discussing them in relation specifically to immigration and asylum law. To quote Cleese outright, because he says it better than I can, research into asylum case law in many countries, including the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, suggests that bisexuals are at a serious risk of having their claim dismissed because their stories and identities are cast as non-plausible or non-consequential, while the discretion requirement, i.e. the expectation that lesbian, gay, bisexual or trans applicants will live discreet lives, in other words, stay in the closet, to prevent persecution, has been successfully challenged in many jurisdictions. Bisexuals are still alleged to be able to pass without hassle if they only entered heterosexual relations. Bisexual claimants often find it impossible to prove their membership of a particular social group. The fluidity bound up with bisexuality and the lack of acceptance of bisexual identities is at odds with the immutability assumption of sexual orientation models. The common discrimination against bisexuals in asylum law is a direct outflow of what Kenji Yoshino calls the epistemic contract of bisexual erasure, the obstacles to make the bisexual experience intelligible in the field of law, and to the bisexual claimants accessing a right to asylum, are part of the regulation of the sexuality of migrants' bodies through biopolitical acts of government with all too often necropolitical consequences. Research indicates that in many countries, asylum claims based on persecution because of bisexuality are much more likely to be turned down than asylum claims not related to sexual minority status in general, or claims based on gay or lesbian identification in particular. The relative invisibility of bisexuality in refugee law mirrors its lack of visibility in human rights practice and discourse in general. While bisexuality is nominally included in many documents that deal with human rights from the angle of gender and sexuality, bisexuality-related issues are rarely discussed in detail and do not usually inform policy recommendations. Too long didn't read. Bisexual asylum seekers and refugees, especially those seeking refuge on the basis of their sexuality, often find themselves navigating a system built only for monosexual people, leaving them seen as lesser and often having to prove their sexuality in a way gay men and lesbians do not have to, often being told, go pretend to be straight in a place that wants them dead. And obviously, this is an issue of which racial and cultural politics cannot be ignored either. I would highly recommend reading this paper because it's well written and incredibly informative. The horrible world is full of asylum seekers right now, and we must welcome them, not only physically but emotionally too, and this means accepting all parts of them. Cleese also mentions immutability here. Immutability is a big issue for bisexual people. This is something I want to expand on in a separate video at some point, so I'm not going to bang on about it too much here. But immutability can basically be summarized as the born this way defense. The idea that people are born with a specific and unchanging sexual orientation. For obvious reasons, this concept cannot fully consider bisexuality in all of its forms. Bisexuality is often seen to change, whether you agree with that viewing or phrasing, irregardless. It is seen as fluid. Immutability is often used as a catch in bisexual asylum cases. If you are bisexual, go back to your country and be in a so-called straight relationship. Whereas no judge would ask this of a lesbian or gay man, bisexual asylum seekers are often considered less killable than monosexual queer people, and yet there is no statistic in the world that shows that bisexual people are actually less likely to suffer at the hand of violent homophobia. Pretend to be gay for asylum or pretend to be straight so you aren't killed at home. I found an interesting blog post which collected a bunch of case studies for bisexual immigrants, asylum seekers, refugees who had issues like this. It was written by Delaram Konakda for the Oxford Research Centre of Humanities. At the time, she was a junior law student studying in Tehran. Konakda, again, like Cleese, expands on the hardships of bisexual asylum seekers in regards to the law. She discusses a well-known incident from 1994 in the US where a bisexual asylum seeker from Jamaica was denied asylum because the judge simply refused to believe that he was bisexual, because he had once been married to a woman, even though the judge saw physical evidence that proved that this asylum seeker had been attacked in a homophobic hate crime. She then contradicted herself and said, well, even if he is bisexual, she had no reason to believe that Jamaica was dangerous for bisexuals, even though she had seen the evidence that it was. This judge continued to work for the Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit in Chicago until 2017. Another case discussed in this blog post is a case that happened in the UK, where a bisexual asylum seeker, again from Jamaica, had to fight for almost 4 years after his asylum claim was rejected, when the British Home Office accused him of dishonest sexuality because he had relationships with both men and women. At the time of his case, he had been in a relationship with a man for 2 years, but having once been married to a woman, he was told by the British government his relationship was a sham, a fraud, a lie. He would eventually win his case.
It was only like 2 weeks before I was introduced to heroin and crack cocaine. I started using recreationally, and obviously like you can't do that with heroin before you become addicted to it.
Demi Lovato.
Well, I, like a lot of people, you know, being completely honest, during the pandemic, fell off and felt really a lot of, you know, and I would never sit here and go, I've been fucking sober, and I didn't, and I fell off, and I realized...
3 months after Amy Winehouse died, we finally know what killed her.
Amy was more than 5 times the legal drink drive limit when she died, as the coroner at the inquest into her death recorded a verdict of misadventure.
We now know what caused the death of singer Whitney Houston. She was, of course, found dead in a hotel bathtub last month. On Thursday, coroner's officials said she drowned accidentally. Houston also had at least 5 different drugs in her system, and also, we've learned, had heart disease.
And especially during the period when I was doing cocaine, I mean, it was like the drug was my friend.
Yeah, it's your lover that never leaves you.
And I never did it with other people. And it's such a terrible way to fill that void, because it just adds to the void, really, because it's not real.
I briefly mentioned substance abuse when discussing violence against bisexual women, but I want to expand on it a bit more here. Substance use and a substance use disorder are obviously 2 different things. Everyone can use drugs, but not everyone will become addicted or reliant on them. Both substance use and substance use disorder occur at higher rates in bisexual people, especially bisexual women, than they do in heterosexuals, gays, or lesbians. Dr. Nicole Johnson, who I mentioned earlier, considers, as I said, substance abuse as one of the main factors for why bisexual women suffer higher rates of violence than other women. One report from UCL in the UK in 2021 found that from the people they had examined, illicit drug use was highest amongst bisexual people at 37%, while for lesbian and gay people it was 25% and heterosexuals at 10.5%. A 2020 study by Megan Schuler and Rebecca Collins on the differences in substance use between bisexual people and gay and lesbian people found that both male and female sexual minority adults had significantly elevated rates of substance use compared to heterosexual people, but that relative to lesbian and gay women, bisexual women had significantly elevated odds of binge drinking, marijuana use, illicit drug use, opioid misuse, and alcohol use disorder. The paper then went on to conclude that bisexual women were at significantly greater risk for multiple substance use behaviours relative to lesbian and gay women. They did not observe any substance use behaviours for which bisexual individuals had significantly lower risk than their lesbian and gay peers. These disparities may be explained in part by unique risk factors for substance use experienced by bisexual individuals, particularly bisexual women. And these are facts published in medical journals. The severity of these stats, the struggle of the people behind them, cannot be downplayed. Those unique risk factors for bi women, it's just biphobia, specifically bi-misogyny. It doesn't matter whether that is in the form of high school bullying or institutional erasure. The risk factor is the simple act of existing as bisexual. To quote the summary of a literature review published by the APA, the American Psychological Association, written by Christina Schulz, Emily Glatt, and Amy Staymates, bisexual women report elevated alcohol and drug use compared to other sexual minority women. Specifically, bisexual women experience unique discrimination, i.e. bi negativity, and are at a heightened risk for other forms of victimization and other stressful life events. Given this heightened experience with stress, bisexual women may use alcohol as a maladaptive coping mechanism. Further disclosure of one's sexual identity may produce opportunities for connecting with the LGBT community, but such openness may increase exposure to discrimination and stigmatization among bisexual women. Too long didn't read again. Bisexual women suffer because you don't want to be friends with us, because other queer people don't want to defend us or hang out with us or let us into their so-called spaces. Okay, a few more quotes, but pushing most of the science and stats away for a moment. I want to talk about trauma, because that's the be-all and end-all of this, really. Bisexual people face a lot of trauma, and we don't know how to deal with it. No one knows how to deal with us. And so we live miserable lives. I mean, we're sexier than the rest of you, but we're miserable. Bisexual people not only suffer physically from the drugs we take or the abuse we face or the jobs we don't seem to have, but also emotionally, mentally. Bisexual people aren't just crazy on television. We have huge rates of mental health issues within our community. They are staggering, and I mean staggering in comparison to the rest of the LGBT community, a community that already has astronomical rates of mental health issues compared to the general hetero population. The paper from UCL I mentioned earlier found that the prevalence of depression and anxiety disorders among bisexual people was 40%, and for lesbian and gay people it was 28%, which was significantly higher than that for heterosexuals at 16%. A study for the Journal of Public Health and Stonewall in the UK, the largest survey of its kind, found that bisexual women were 64% more likely to report an eating disorder and 37% more likely to have deliberately self-harmed than lesbians. They were also 26% more likely to have felt depressed and 20% more likely to have suffered from anxiety in the previous year than lesbians. Also found bisexual women were less likely to be out to their peers and family, which indicates to me a lack of support for bisexual people in regards to their bisexuality. As I promised, stats aside, as a bisexual, and I'm speaking for myself here, no one else, there is something not only heartbreaking about all the things I just discussed, how hard life can be for bisexual people, especially bisexual women. Not only does that suck, and not only do I know that as my own truth, not only does it upset me that it is happening to people I know, to bi people everywhere, the worst of it, I think, is how no one else seems to care. How complicit other queer people can be in the biphobia, the bi-misogyny, how the whole of society has somehow ganged up and decided not only to oppress us, but erase us. When people refuse to see the statistics, especially fellow LGBT people who are educated in them, that can really suck when you are one of those statistics. Like, behind every stat, there is actually a real living, breathing, human bisexual person, worthy of compassion and desperate for acceptance. Biphobia is classist, it's racist, it's transphobic, and it is deadly too. And everyone has the choice and responsibility to approach it however they like. We all make our own decisions, and if you don't care about biphobia, that's fine, keep it to yourself. That's between you and whatever higher power you may or may not believe in. However, it is cruel and plainly incorrect to deny a reality that is forced on bi people every day. And yes, I'm talking about you, the Lavender Menace podcast. It is a struggle I am happy to vouch for existing. I have never been anything but honest about my own personal struggles on this channel. I know what it's like to be poorer, crazier, higher because I am bi. I know what it's like to be bisexual and a survivor. Like I said, behind every statistic, there is a real person, and I guess sometimes they have YouTube channels.